People screamed for help and asked to be released. The hero's eyes were closed. People asked to pull them out immediately and did not understand where they were. The hero opened his eyes with displeasure, rubbing his face. He thought it was too noisy. He looked around him and saw a crowd of people in a transparent cube suspended in the middle of space. The children called for moms and dads, and the hero asked them not to scream, otherwise his head would explode. He looked to the side with a frown and thought, "Who are all these people?" He stood up. His hand touched the glowing inscriptions on the floor. Now fear befell the hero. He raised his head and asked where they were. A large girl in white religious robes appeared above the people, yellow light emanating from her and the symbols next to her. From the back of the dome, an orc knocked and looked around the room with a gloomy look. People asked, "What?" And others asked everyone to shut up and not provoke the monster. The orc opened his slobbering mouth, full of fangs. People asked if he was real, and someone was guaranteed to answer that all this could not be real. People looked around in fear. They asked, "Is this really some kind of prank with a hidden camera?" The guy calmed the frightened girl and said that this was really a joke, and the old man in front of them said that in this case it defies common sense. A lot of questions rained down. The hero stood in shock and tried to understand how it all happened. He was definitely at home. Just recently he remembered how he ate without interest. A notification came to his phone and he paid attention to it with slight curiosity. He picked up the phone. There was an invitation on the screen to participate in the game. The hero wondered with great curiosity what kind of game this was. He accepted the invitation. The guy grabbed his face in horror and realized that this was his last memory, and he didn't remember anything else. People were knocking on the door with glowing symbols and demanding to open the door. Some were angry because there was a big panic. One of the guys smiled nervously and told people that they were all in the same boat and asked if anyone remembered anything. He grabbed the surprised hero by the shoulder and asked if he knew anything. The hero said that he had no idea, and the guy immediately backed down from him. The hero straightened his jacket. He thought that he could touch other people, and this was not a hallucination or a dream. He touched his shoulder and thought that he did not feel awkward. He looked at the hovering girl. Her eyes with light eyelashes were closed. Fire began to emanate from the girl, which greatly frightened people. The orc on the other side of the cube growled angrily. Everyone stared at the huge girl as she welcomed people to the new world. She expressed gratitude for the response to their invitation. The hero opened his eyes wide. People did not understand what kind of invitation they were talking about. The girl's face remained calm. The voice came from inside. She said that people were chosen as warriors who would save this dying continent. People panicked and did not understand what was happening. They wanted to call the police. The girl asked to pay attention to what she said next, because it would be directly related to their chances of life. The girl said that they could not all go to the continent. The hero asked in confusion what this meant. The girl repeated herself and said that she had the right to go to the continent. She was interrupted and told to tie it up and leave. People looked in shock. Someone remained calm. The girl repeated and said that the right to go to the continent. Someone cried and the girl said that they would only get the right. A certain guy was as cold-blooded as possible and the girl ended up, "Only a few survivors will receive the place where the people were." It was a huge luminous pyramid. The girl said that this place is called Starting Point. She said that people can consider this place as a kind of waiting room. At the starting point, there were tables with a lot of food and medieval weapons. The girl reported this. The hero thought that now he understands. The girl said that further people will be able to get a specialization. These could be magicians and warriors. She said that some people would gain a characteristic ability. The hero realized that he had found himself in the world that he had seen in games and novels. The girl said that there are 4 levels: ordinary, rare, heroic, and legendary. The hero took the spear and began to closely examine it. The girl said that the found weapon should be used for protection. Above the hero's head, the ceiling cracked and burst. He turned back in fear. Heavy blocks of stones fell onto the ceiling. People, along with the hero, began to watch what was happening in horror. The hero wondered if this wall was cracking. The girl calmly said that all people have different homelands and different characters. She said the place was prepared to maximize their individuality and help them grow. She said that if people said status window, they would understand what she was talking about. People began to repeat these words in panic. The hero did the same. A golden, luminous streak appeared in the air in front of him. It opened a golden window with the data and characteristics of the hero. The hero's name was Keen. He looked at his characteristics in bewilderment and tried to understand whether Strength 10 and Endurance 11 were good or bad. The window reported that the hero had received an ability. Keen pressed the button and thought that other people would also receive their powers. The guy's ability was Eyes of the Soul, which allowed him to open other people's status windows as well as hidden abilities. A bunch of status windows floated into the air from all sides. People studied their characteristics. Someone was surprised. People were interested in what the growth limit was. What the overall assessment was, Teen began nervously poking at the status window and trying to find what was written about him. The overall assessment of the hero said that his indicators were inferior and did not advise him to try hard. All indicators were disappointing except for luck and intelligence. The assessment said that the end of the hero was obvious. Keen looked with horror at such words as inferior, disappointing, the end is obvious. In any case, he read this assessment in shock. People around were panicking and Keen fell silent. He grabbed his face and asked if they really thought he would just die. The girl said, "Well, The monsters began to hit the walls of the dome, and they began to crack. The girl wished everyone good luck. The monsters broke through the walls and ran towards the people, screaming. A meat grinder began around the hero. Shards of glass cut his face. Everyone pushed him and screamed in fear. The man behind the hero shouted for everyone to raise their weapons. He shouted and asked, "Didn't people see the windows of their fortunes?" He ordered everyone to raise their weapons because it no longer looked like a prank. Keen looked at the stranger in surprise. He saw someone else's status window. He saw the durability indicator, and it was level 30. Keen was glad that he found what he was looking for. He smiled wickedly and called the man his meat shield. The monsters broke the glass and ran towards the people with furious screams. They bit into people's flesh. People ran away and shouted that they needed to raise their weapons as quickly as possible. Keen jumped out in front of the man with a spear and said that he would cover him. The man asked in bewilderment if the hero was really going to fight. Keen gritted his teeth and said yes, because he couldn't continue to sit idly by. "You have to try to do something." The man smiled while the chaos was happening behind him and said that the hero's words made him feel better. Noting that the guy looked rather frail, Keen said that to begin with, "Quickly run." He opened his eyes wide, finishing the word run. The man also turned back in fright. A long-eared monster flew towards him, its fang mouth open. Keen hit his spear, and it flew to the side. The man looked in surprise at the screaming hero, who was angry, and said that the man himself called on everyone to fight, saying that you need to fight off monsters if you don't want to die. He ran, leaving the knocked-out monster behind, and said that he needed to run away urgently if life was precious. Keen looked forward intently, and screams came from behind him. He exhaled with a slight smile. He smiled and thought it would be a good idea to start with one trained pick. Small monsters with crazy smiles jumped on the heroes. Keen hit one. The second monster jumped at him from behind. The man fought it off with his shield. The two men ran forward. The door began to glow more and more, which the man drew the hero's attention to. The men beamed, glad that they were able to reach the exit. Keen froze when a cry for help came from behind. Behind him stood a goblin. The hero reluctantly turned around. The man began to be eaten by a crowd of goblins surrounding him. Keen looked gloomily at the unfortunate man. The man called him. Keen clenched his fist. The man was crying, and blood was flowing from his nose. Keen ran at the monsters with a spear. Keen grabbed the bags as the happy man looked at him. He looked away in horror. He realized that the hero was aiming at the bags lying on the ground. Keen ran away. The partner called out to the hero. He clutched the shield in his hands and frowned. He ran after the hero. The man looked after them with despair. He cried and reached out to them, asking for help, while the goblins attacked him. Keen closed his eyes and mentally asked the man for forgiveness. He looked back coolly. He looked at the bags on his belt and thought that on the contrary, he should say thank you to the guy because thanks to this, he can now live. Two men sat near the gated aisle. They looked at the hole, and the man asked what they should do now. Keen replied that if he knew now, he would not be sitting still. Keen looked away in annoyance and thought that his partner had strength but no intelligence and noted that he felt sorry for him. The gloomy yellow light of the caves fell on the heroes. Keen said that first they need to find out where exactly they are, and asked if his partner had ever played games. He responded with a question, "Has anyone ever played?" Keen introduced him and the man as an NPC in a dungeon game and said that there was a status window, characteristics, rank, equipment, specialization. He asked him where he could see this. Keen said to imagine that they are now in the game and asked what should be done. Park, the partner, said he didn't know. Keen imagined how he and his partner defeated an orc and said that they needed to raise the level. He added that there might be a system in which stats increase when killing monsters, and during battle you can get specialization. He looked at the floor and said that first you need to become stronger. He held a bag in his hand and said that it was fortunate they have weapons, a shield, drinking water, and food. The men sat thoughtfully, and Keen said that their situation was better than that of others. Then a huge Cyclops looked into their cell. The heroes looked at him in fear. The huge Cyclops looked at them with an open mouth. Keen didn't understand why he didn't attack. He used his soul eyes and looked at the monster's status window. Keen saw that the Cyclops saw very poorly and had low intelligence. Keen motioned for his partner to remain silent, and he nodded in response. Keen grabbed the spear. Puck, with a trembling voice, asked if the hero was really Keen decided that he could kill. He thrust a spear into the monster's head and said that he must kill it. A scream was heard. Blood began to splash in different directions. Keen took out his spear and hit it again through the monster's eye and screamed for him to die. The monster roared, blood running down its face. He dropped dead. Keen was breathing heavily, staring into space in shock. The status window reported that his strength stat had increased by 1. He noted that this happened thanks to the murder. Keen wiped his sweat with a smile, and Puck looked at him confused. Keen said that, as expected, his assumptions were correct. He turned in bewilderment at his blushing partner. He put his hand on his shoulder and said that if he can do it, so can he. And he himself thought that with his durability of 30, it was definitely possible. Puck looked at the hero with enthusiasm and asked what his name was. Keen smiled, mentally said that he was his master who in the future would draw everything out of him, including souls, but said out loud only his name. Puck pointed to himself with a smile and introduced himself. Puck smiled, and the hero said that he began to cut the skin with a knife. Puck asked in confusion what the hero was doing. He was measuring and making something. He put a leather collar on the man's neck, and his durability increased by 1 point. Puck looked with admiration at the hero, who made himself the same. He looked away while Puck followed him and thanked him, saying that from now on he could rely on him for everything. Keenan said they needed to get out of here first. He turned to his partner with a smile and said that he then suggested that they stop being slackers. A loud sound echoed through the cave. The men turned in fear to its source. The frightened girl cried and ran towards them. A huge monster was running after her. The girl called for help. The man turned around. Keen shouted in horror that they needed to run. Sweat was running down the hero's face. He couldn't understand what it was. He ran and looked at his spear, could not understand how to fight off so many monsters with it, and thought about what kind of girl this was. He used the eyes of the soul while running. He looked at the girl's status window. He was surprised to note that she had legendary mana. He stopped. Puck began to ask in horror why he froze. Keen looked confused and thought that the girl was the owner of legendary level mana. He turned around sharply and said that they were fighting and ordered his partner to save the girl. HCK looked at the hero with fear and said that there were about 3 monsters there and asked if they could really handle it. Keen said they would go at an angle, but Puck didn't understand. The girl ran and cried. He looked around the corner and ordered us to run here. The girl saw the hero and immediately responded. She ran towards the men standing around the corner. Puck watched as a huge monster appeared around the corner. He saw his reflection in his eyes. Puck barely had time to put up a shield that took his blow. A screaming monster looms over the hero's campaign. Keen jumped. He thrust his spear into the monster's body, and blood flowed. The sweaty Puck looked at him with a serious face. He turned around. Keen thrust his spear and shouted for them to stay away. Keen looked in horror at the approaching monsters and screamed to announce their presence. The shadow of a huge hand hung over his face. There was a wave. Someone landed behind the hero, and the monsters were cut into pieces. Rivers of blood flowed. King calmly watched as the monsters fell one after another. He turned around anxiously, wondering what it was. Someone walked in front of the hero and dragged a sword behind him. The unknown man calmly looked at the floor. He looked up at the hero with a cold gaze. The hero and the unknown looked at each other in silence. Surprise froze on the hero's face. He looked at the unknown and could not understand where he came from. He used the eyes of the soul. Almost all of the unknown's stats were legendary and heroic. Keen saw that the unknown person was Alton's regressor. He looked at the status window in surprise and tried to understand what regression meant, assuming that it was a return in time. Park thanked the unknown person, introduced himself, and asked his name. He called himself Henson. Keen looked at the web of skills. The general assessment admired the character's data. Heroic Luck 23, Legendary Endurance 23, Legendary Agility 28. Keen looked into the void and called it complete absurdity to himself. He looked at the regressor who was wiping the blood from his face and realized that this was not his first visit. Puck looked at the nervous hero with a smile, hens, and said they looked pretty used to fighting. Puck hugged the hero with a smile. The hero looked to the side and called his name, noting that Henson seemed even more accustomed than them, to which the regressor said that he was just lucky. Keen looked gloomily at the status window and thought that this was definitely not luck and decided to look at the secret ability. The regressor ability was the status of a swordmaster, G many points for actions with a sword. Keen looked at the status with black envy and thought that he was very envious. He looked at the Cal regressor who was looking away. Sweat ran down the hero's face. He began to think why Henson was staring at him and began to worry that he had burned himself while watching his ability. The girl watched the men from behind the wall. Keen smiled, extended his hand, and introduced himself, thanking the regressor for his help, noting to himself that he should act as friendly as possible. He asked if the regressor walks alone. He shook his hand, and Henson said that it was, and added that he was now gathering survivors, and said that he had prepared a base for the survivors in a suitable camp. Keen looked at the regressor and asked how many people survived. Henson thought about it and said that there were about 33 who were able to fight. He said that, to be honest, if he had his way, he would really like for the hero and his partner to come to them. Teen looked gloomily at the regressor and noted to himself that he was dangerous, good in words, a good-natured peacemaker. He asked himself, didn't Henson realize that such a gathering of people would be a nuisance? He looked at the icy face of the regressor. He imagined the complex diagrams behind the man and thought that he definitely knew how to get through the location and most likely even the secrets. Keen thought that the best thing to do would be to maintain a good relationship with him. Keen smiled and said that, in that case, they would do so. Park asked if Henson received a specialization. Henson, without hiding, said that he was a swordmaster, and at that time Keen drew attention to the crying girl. She sat behind the wall and buried her face in her knees. He extended his hand to the unfortunate girl. He smiled and told her to stand up and take his hand. The girl looked away from her thoughts and looked at the hero and said, "Thank you," in a trembling voice. Henson watched from the sidelines. Something made him surprised. He approached the girl and said unrestrainedly, "Is this really?" The girl looked at the regressor in fear and said that her name was Han. Henson blushed and said that he was glad to meet you and introduced himself. Keen looked at the regressor incredulously and began to think about why he was so happy. Heian hugged the hero's hand. Henson asked if everything was okay. The girl said uncertainly that everything was fine. Henson smiled and awkwardly scratched his cheek, asking if he could call the girl hi, and said that if she suddenly felt uncomfortable, then she should definitely talk about it. She looked at the regressor in fear and said, in a trembling voice, that everything was fine. Teen glanced at the regressor above the smiling regressor. He saw meanings such as the regressor of Altanus, the swordmaster who began the second round, the one who could not win, the one who realized, the one who carries victims on his back. The hero thought, was he looking? He introduced the warrior to the cemetery and called him the strongest man who had already seen the end of this world once. He looked at the man and thought that if he, having rolled back time, wanted to change the future, catching him by surprise, then he was probably trying to get everything that could be useful. He looked at Hanny and thought that she was definitely included in this list. She blushed embarrassingly and hummed. She looked at the regressor and said that it was at least a little late, and thanked him for saving her. Keen smiled and blushed and said, "You're welcome." He beamed. His Hai pressed herself into his hand. Ken's face became gloomy again. He looked at the girl and saw that she was a person with wild, magical potential. He looked at the regressor and knew that he was a warrior who had begun the second round. He imagined them side by side, joyful, smiling at the hero, and called them a treasure. He smiled slightly. He looked at the people insidiously and thought that they would go to the very end. Puck hummed in admiration in front of the arriving heroes. There was a camp where people were working. He smiled admiringly and asked the regressor how he found such a place. Henson smiled and said that he had stumbled upon him by accident, and Keen behind him thought that he must have already known about him. The girl love ran to the regressor and shouted his name. She, CCSH, leaned over and asked if he had already returned. She greeted the new arrivals. Henson called her G. She said that the man was delayed, so she was worried. She looked at the newcomers and asked who they were. Henson said that they would now live with them in the camp, and Keen at that time summoned the eyes of the soul. He chuckled thoughtfully and exclaimed in surprise when he saw the girl's disgusting performance. She clung to the regressor, who was only 22, and she was 29. Keen began to sweat with embarrassment. He saw that stats were even worse than his. The general assessment said that the hero had met his soulmate, which made Keen frown, not understanding which person wrote this assessment. He silently watched as Park looked confused at Ji's advances and noted that she was also a selfish cynic. Park introduced himself, introduced the hero, and began to introduce Hyeon. Hyeon interrupted him and introduced herself, embarrassedly asking him to take care of her. Ji folded her arms over her chest and looked at Hae sternly. She looked at the girl arrogantly. Keen noted disdainfully that the girl was now judging people. He looked at the naive man with the shield, noted that he was large and armed, which means he passed. I looked at Hae and thought that in comparison, Haeun, who had a limp in her leg, and the frail one were failures. Ji smiled sweetly and asked, "Is Park a tank by any chance?" She said that Puck looked like he had killed a lot of monsters. Puck pointed with admiration at the gloomy hero and said that he killed a couple of others, and all thanks to the hero. He said that if it weren't for Keen, he would have died. Ji looked at the hero cynically. Frail Keen stood holding a spear in his hands. Ji blushed and clasped her hands together, saying that, in that case, she was glad to meet everyone. She looked at the crowd of people and said that she would take them to the camp first. She said that men and women live separately, so Han, as she said, would go with her. She looked at the regressor and asked if it was possible to do so, to which he said that he was presenting it to her. Ji smiled and turned to the hero and asked him to take care of her too. Keen thought about this woman and smiled sweetly back at her, and he remembered all his insidious smiles and realized that this woman was of the same breed as him. He looked in surprise at the people staring at him. They shouted in delight that the warriors had arrived. Old men and Des spectacled people joyfully greeted the heroes. Keem looked arrogantly at the rejoicing people and noted that this was indeed a safe zone. He looked at the people and thought that it was definitely not for him, for them, but not for him. Puck embarrassedly talked to his sweet grandmother, and Keen asked himself when he suddenly became a meat shield. The next day, people slept covered with skins and thick fabrics. Keen tossed and turned and sweated and was asked if he slept well. He sat down to pleased. Puck stood contentedly and thanked the regressor, who said that he was glad to hear. Henson looked down and was addressed. Keen put on his jacket and said that, judging by what he saw yesterday, there are not many people here who are fit for battle. He looked at the worried regressor and asked how he keeps this place safe. Henson said the environment isn't that great, to be honest. He imagined starving, dirty people, and said that there was an acute shortage of drinking water, food everywhere, and there were not enough people capable of fighting. He said that therefore it was necessary to especially take care of those people. Hansen turned to the hero and said that things could get worse. And Keen turned to him again. He imagined starving people and said that the food they brought would instantly run out, and given that they were constantly fighting with monsters, people unable to fight would only become a greater burden. Henson looked seriously at the hero and said that they are not a burden. Keen looked arrogantly at the regressor and said that they were a burden and that he was not involved in charity. Henson looked down gloomily. Puck watched with excitement, and Keen looked away indifferently. Keen looked at the big guy, who asked if he was really going to leave, and Keen said not at all. It was a sunny day, and Keen said that there was no point in waiting for a miracle here. Henson stared into space with fear. He looked at the hero, he said, and yet Keen pointed to himself with a smile and said that if we all fight together, we can overcome everything, including himself. Henson beamed and thanked the hero. Keen faked a bow and said that, to be honest, he basically understood what Henson was thinking. He said that he probably wanted to escape with all these people. Keen said that he understood and accepted his intentions. He put his hand to his chin and said that he was different from the regressor and said that he was not the kind of person who would easily sacrifice himself for others, and said that it was not his intention to move in a group. He coughed and said it was okay if Henson thought he was a little selfish. Henson shook his head and said that he could understand him and said that of course Keen wanted something. Keen faked it as if it was a surprise to him. He smiled wickedly and thought that he was wondering what to do if he offered to sacrifice himself for the sake of friendship, as befits a good-natured peacemaker, but Henson understands everything much better than he expected. Teen turned to the regressor and said that in that case, he would say he called him a charming regressor, and said that it was in his plans that he would have in the future. He approached the surprised regressor with a smile and said that they also wanted to be initiated into them. Keen thought he couldn't leave him alone to reap all the benefits. Henson opened his eyes in surprise. He smiled and said that the hero knew he turned into a memory, remembering a huge white girl and the people under her. He said that at the starting point, this strange announcement gave two options: cleaning and survival. However, Keen said seriously that he believed that the survival option was not really possible. He held out his hand and said that he didn't know how possible it would be for a small number of people to appropriate most of the resources, but if Mr. Hansen's goal was not cleansing but survival, then such a crowd of people fit to fight was even more undesirable. He presented a pile of corpses and said that even if they were not eaten by monsters, they would die of hunger. Henson looked down heavily. Keen said that this was obvious to absolutely anyone. Keen smiled. Henson said that he understood perfectly well what he was talking about. He extended his hand to the hero and asked him to take care of him. Keen smiled and extended his hand, asking for the same thing, but he thought that he was pressed against him only because he was a regressor. The look of the regressor was not so cold. Keen noted this. He also noted that Henson knows that the hero is not strong. They shook hands. The hero was glad that, for the regressor, he had become an intelligence specialist, something like a tactician or manager. Keen smiled wickedly as they shook his hand. A huge, gloomy hall, with a bunch of columns among which monsters of different sizes walked, appeared. Puck hit the monster's back with his shield. He pushed the monster and turned to the regressor, who shouted that he knew. Keen looked in shock at the high speed of the regressor. He swung in a jump. He cut the monster. He looked ahead, sternly and coldly. The monster screamed as its blood flew in all directions. Henson landed. Keen, like a theater spectator, watched the work of the regressor with curiosity and a smile. He turned to him. Henson said that it seemed that there were several more ahead. He would delay them, and the hero in pack. Keen interrupted him and said that he understood everything and ordered to grab the food. Henson ran to kill the monsters, and the hero turned to the big guy and said that there were far fewer monsters in the area of the starting point than expected. Puck remembered how much fuss they made at the very beginning. Keen looked to the side and said that the area had already been cleared out. Puck turned around and turned to him, suggesting that Henson was engaged in fencing on the ground. Keen folded his arms over his chest and said that he had no idea. He also thought that he was doing something similar, and maybe his specialization had an effect. Puck looked down sadly when he heard about the specialization. Keen looked at him silently. He put his hand on his shoulder and told him not to worry too much because they would soon open theirs too, and Puck was helping a lot even without her. Henson wiped the sweat from his face. Puck asked what he did. He said that all this was the work of the master. Keen said that it was not at all. Keen smiled and said that without him he would not have gotten here. Puck looked at the hero tearfully and called his name. Something distracted him and he looked to the side. Keen brought up the status window and looked into it. In surprise, he was surprised by the open specialization in his window. There was a list of warrior, archer, mage, and a rare commander level. Keen smiled and was glad that everything was faster than he thought. He noticed the commander's icon. He began to wonder what it was. With curiosity, he began flipping through the descriptions of specializations: warrior, archer, mage. Keen thought that they were all good for a start. He thought that the archer was cool with his long-range attacks, and the magician would raise his mana, which he had at the bottom. He looked at the commander's description, which gave a bonus 2 to intelligence, but no longer provided any combat advantages. Henson appeared from behind and suggested that the hero had received a specialization. Keen turned it around and said that that was it, listed the classes on offer, and last mentioned the rare level commander. Henson asked in surprise. Keen looked at the status window with excitement and thought that this card seemed interesting to him, but was it really a trap? Pack joyfully exclaimed that Keen was the commander. He didn't know why, but it seemed to him that the commander would be ideal for the hero. Joyful Pack introduced the hero in the image of a military leader and said that he did not say this, but his type is ideal for a commander. Teen laughed sheepishly, but thought that he was closer to a rogue than a commander because he knew nothing about strategies. Henson thought about it and said that the commander has quite a few bonuses and said that other specializations first of all add 3 stat points. Pack looked dumbfounded at the regressor, while Keen thought, is it really not worth it? Henson thoughtfully approached and said that an archer would be a good option for a hero, but Pack shouted that Keen was the commander and asked to command him. Puck kept getting angry. Henson said that support from a long distance could be very handy. Puck shouted that Keen is a commander who can find merit in everyone. Keen thought Henson spoke as an archer. An enraged Pack shouted as a commander. The situation repeated itself over and over again. Henson beamed and said, the archer. The enraged Puck shouted, the commander, syllable by syllable. Henson and Park looked at each other sternly while Keen smiled sheepishly. While the men were arguing, Keen was thinking with a smile, not understanding what to choose. He looked at the magician and thought that this would be better. He clicked on choosing a specialization. A yellow current and light enveloped him. The men stopped arguing and looked at the shining hero, who asked, "Is this all?" Puck pushed the regressor away and ran towards the hero, shouting his name. The man, beside himself with curiosity, asked who he took. Interrupting each other, they all shouted at the hero. He calmly grabbed his neck. He smiled. A purple symbol appeared behind him. He said that he had taken the magician. Puck fell to the ground in annoyance, considering this all absurd. Hence, and seriously, he asked why the hero chose a magician. Keen smiled and said that he just had a feeling. Henson chuckled and said it was clear. Keen thought he was sorry that he is not an archer, but he decided that he still had a reason. He thought that physical activity was not his style, so the archer passed by. He was drawn to the commander, but in that case he would have received only one step. He asked himself, what about a magician? His intelligence and luck became heroic. He decided that it would be a good idea to take the path of maintaining high intelligence. Mona can also be raised by 4. His mana was 0, and therefore these points are wildly valuable. The status window notified that mana had increased by 3 levels. Sparks and currents sparkled in the hero's hands. He thought in surprise that new knowledge flowed into his head on its own, exactly one after another, building a tower in his head. He opened the status window. He looked at his abilities in surprise. The overall rating is okay. The assessment reported that with the hero's talents, it was difficult to even sense mana. Raising mana by 3 stats gives hope, but it is not recommended to expect tights in magic. Keen clenched his glowing fist with a smile and thought that it was very good and worthy of instant use. He looked at the dejected big man and asked if he had chosen his specialization. Puck scratched his head and said that a warrior with a shield and a priest had come out to him, and he didn't understand what he should take. Henson and Keen said simultaneously to the shield, warrior. Pack embarrassedly said that the priest too, syllable by syllable at the same time. Henson and Keen said the warrior with the shield. Frustrated, Puck glowed yellow as he selected an option in the status window. Keen looked at the big man and asked if he had chosen. Puck raised his shield contentedly. He smiled and said that as he had been told he was a warrior with a shield. Keen smiled and said that was a good choice, thinking to himself that he was officially a meat shield now. Henson looked at his teammates and congratulated them both and said it was time to go back. He looked at the bags and asked how they would divide the food. Keen grabbed the bag and said that 2 would be enough for them. Henson caught the bag. He wanted to say something. Keen said that that was enough to feed people. Henson looked at the bag confusedly. He buried his face in the back. He bowed to the smiling heroes and began to thank them for their work. Survivor camp people were sitting on their couches. G was eating cookies. Another girl's stomach was growling. She asked where Hung was because she was starving to death. G calmly ordered to be patient a little longer, and he would come soon. The girl said gloomily that she wished he would come quickly. G pointed to the bitten bun and asked if the girl would snack on this. She suggested leaving some. G looked at the old man shaking with hunger with a cold gaze. The dirty man stretched his hand towards them. G asked what he was staring at and asked if he was really hungry too. She broke the bun in half, saying that there was nothing to be done. She handed one half to the girl. The man looked with an exhausted gaze. She began tearing the bun into crumbs and throwing them to the distraught man, calling him a non-working parasite. She smiled and ordered him to eat, continuing to call him a parasite. She turned around sharply, seeing the returning heroes. All the people began to joyfully greet the warriors carrying bags of food. G was one of the first to run to greet the aggressor with a fake smile. She reached her hands towards the bags, noting that Park and Keen had also tried. She said that she would carry on with everything herself. Henson leaned over to the girl and asked her to take care of it since he still had work to do today, and so he had to go. The smiling old man approached the hero and asked him to give him the bag. Keen looked at the old man silently. He turned around and silently went about his business. Puck asked in surprise if the hero really wasn't going to share. The heroes walked with their bags slung over their shoulders. Keen said that he already said that they are not volunteers, to which Puck replied that yes, but it still looks like something. Keen looked seriously at the big guy and said that if they want to eat, then they should raise their sword and go out, and said that perhaps Henson brought them here to stir up people. G handed out food to people with a smile. With a blush on her cheeks, she tucked her hair behind her ear, and everyone thanked her. Keen looked at the girl gloomily and thought that in the absence of a regressor, she is in charge of all the management here, the type of people who are strong in front of the weak, but weak in front of the strong. He imagined her sitting on the throne and called her the local king in the absence of the regressor, something like that. He looked without interest at the couple admiring him behind him. He watched as people hugged and rejoiced, holding bread in their hands. Some people worked hard carrying stones. Teen looked at him in surprise. People blocked the holes with stones. They were worried that monsters might invade again. Hyan, with a sad face, carried a stone. They shouted at her and asked why she was so slow. The man shouted at Han that she would go without food if she did not meet her quota. Keen chuckled and thought that for some reason he smiled insidiously, realizing the kind of treatment Hyan was receiving here. He turned to the big man. He looked at him and asked if he remembered Hyan, whom they met yesterday, to which Park asked if this was the girl whom the hero helped to walk. Keen handed over his bag. He calmly looked at the surprised big man and ordered him to take the bag to her and not take his eyes off her. He couldn't understand why the hero suddenly decided to do this. He blushed and opened his mouth. Tuck started dancing and playfully saying that Keen could trust him with this. Keen was surprised, but only said that he was counting on the big guy. Anne carried the stone with tears in her eyes. Keen silently looked at the girl with a sad smile and thought about how poor she was, about how difficult and lonely she was. He closed his eyes and began to think that no one but them would worry about her. Keen smiled insidiously, mentally asking Han to be as grateful as possible to them for their care when she was weak and in grief. He asked her if it was worthy of trust. Did she want to immediately rely on them? Puck walked with a smile and waved his hand. He suddenly froze. The hero was looking at him from behind. He saw a guy with glasses, smilingly handing the girl a loaf of bread. He was embarrassed, but he handed her bread and offered her something to eat. Hai embarrassedly thanked him. Keen frowned at the sight. He looked at the smiling guy with glasses and tried to understand who he was. The guy with glasses smiled sweetly, and Keen tried to understand. How dare he? Keen frowned even more and thought, how dare this guy approach his precious treasure? He turned away and moved on, thinking that in any case it was obvious why this good attitude was needed when there was not enough food. Himself, he looked ahead gloomily and said it was clear as day that there could be no other goal. Puck turned to the hero in confusion. Keen waved for him to continue walking. Puck nodded seriously and began to approach the talking couple. The guy smiled and held out the bread, saying that he was not on bad terms with Geo, and that's why he secretly brought it. He held out a loaf of bread and asked him to accept it. Hyan hesitantly reached for the bread. The guy smiled and told her not to refuse, saying that the girl had a hard time lately, to which Hyan agreed. She took the bread and began to pull it back, saying that, one way or another, "Thank you for your concern." The guy continued to smile and playfully say that there was nothing wrong with it. Han looked down sadly and thought about how grateful she was. She remembered the hero and thought that if it weren't for him and Puck, she remembered the hero's sweet smile. She shyly pulled the bread towards her, thinking about the hero. She pressed the bread to her lips and asked herself what Keen was doing. The guy with glasses was calling the girl. He embarrassedly scratched his cheek and said that, if she didn't mind, then he wanted to get closer to her. Hyan exclaimed in surprise. She looked at him with a smile, thinking that he was offering to make friends, and said that she also really wanted this. She looked questioningly at the guy. He put his hand on hers. The guy smiled bashfully, addressing Hyan by name, and grabbed her hand. Hyan began to fight back, to which the preoccupied guy exclaimed in surprise that she had just... Hyan asked in horror, "What has come over you?" and asked him to let her go. He became gloomy and said, "How can you be such a slow-witted person?" Hyan looked at the pervert in fear. He asked her if she really thought that he was doing some kind of charity here. Hyan asked again in fear. The guy twisted her hand and said, "If you get something, you need to give something in return." Hyan kept asking again in a trembling voice. The guy asked if she needed to be told even more directly. He squeezed the girl's hand even harder. She squeaked. He pulled her towards him and looked at her with crazy eyes and said, "If you want to live well here in the future, then let yourself lie down in front of me." Hyan looked at him in fear and was silent. The pervert became even more angry and asked if she, the stupid girl, still didn't understand the situation. Puck began to flex his fists, listening to her asking the pervert not to behave like that. Puck hovered over the guilty guy with glasses and said that he had better let her go if he didn't want his arm broken. The veins on the bespectacled man's face bulged, and he asked, "Who is Puck?" His expression didn't change. Puck hit so quickly with the edge of his palm, he hit the guy's forearm, and Hai's hand was freed. The pervert grunted in pain. Puck began to stretch his hands and said that he did not think that such garbage existed in the world, and asked him to stop pretending. The sweaty pervert called the big guy names and he grabbed him by the sea. Unhappy Hyen watched as she was being rescued. Puck threw the guy and he started bouncing off the ground. Geo turned around with displeasure and exclaimed in surprise. All people began to pay attention to what had happened. Keen watched calmly and ate the bread. The bespectacled man screamed hysterically that his nose was bleeding. He screamed without stopping and everyone looked at him. Pak said that whoever looked at it would decide that a baby was born and asked him to stop whining because he didn't even put in any strength. He clenched his fist and walked towards him, but Hai blocked his path. Puck said that he became very noisy and offered to hit him so that he would quiet down. The girl shouted in a trembling voice, "Enough!" She looked up at the big man and anxiously said that she was fine and therefore needed to stop because, at this rate, he really... An enraged Jai pushed through and asked to stop. She approached the guy and asked what they were doing. She looked scared and asked if he was okay. She named him Soku. He said he was fine. She turned to the big man and shouted that violence was prohibited in the camp, asking what he was doing. Park looked at the girl seriously and said that Soku grabbed her hand tightly and mocked her. So he hit her because he clearly saw everything with his own eyes. Ji, dumbfounded, asked Soku if this was all true in a trembling voice. Soku said that this was not true. Soku pushed his glasses up to his nose and said that there might have been a misunderstanding due to him holding Hei's hand somewhat by mistake. Jan turned seriously to Hei and told her not to hide and to tell everything clearly. She asked if Soku was telling the truth. Everyone turned to Heian, who could not utter a word. She looked into emptiness and fear. People were still trying to understand. They asked, "What is going on here?" And someone answered that they didn't know anything, but apparently they fought because of that girl. The crowd viciously mocked Haiyan, belittling her and comparing her to the heroine of a romance novel. Hei in turn turned around and looked at people in horror, trying to understand why they were looking at her with such eyes. She told herself that she had done nothing wrong. Tears began to appear in her eyes. She remembered life on Earth, not paying attention to her seven. She thought that on Earth and here everything was the same. No one is ever on her side. A tear fell to the ground. Haiyan started crying and said that it was true. Haiyan was shaking, standing next to the big man and barely pronouncing the words. She said that after that, Soku forcibly pulled her hand and said, "If you want to live well here," she said in what an angry tone he said it. Ji looked at the girl angrily and said that she did not understand what she was talking about. She folded her arms over her chest and exhaled. Haiyan looked at people in fear. Ji said that in the end Soku pointed out the desire for intimacy, and she expressed agreement. She asked if this was true. Haiyan said that she didn't know that everything was like that. She asked for forgiveness. Ji asked her to listen. She leaned forward angrily and asked if Haiyan thought that she was a small child and that, if she cried, everything would be solved. Park scratched his head while Hei shook in pain. Ji turned to the big man and said that this also concerns him. In such a situation, it is noble to help a girl who is in trouble, but you must first find out what exactly is happening and only then wave your fists. Ji said that the incident was quite minor. Haiyan bowed and began to apologize, and Geo finished with displeasure, which is especially true in a situation where it is unclear who is the pest and who is the victim. She put her hand on Juice's shoulder and asked if she needed to apologize. She smiled slightly and said that it was not in front of her. She leaned over to the pompous Juice and said that she needed to apologize to him for being a direct victim in this situation. Heian looked forward in shock. Joe and Soku smiled insidiously. The girl asked Haiyan why she froze and didn't fall on her face, asking for forgiveness. Pak closed his eyes in displeasure and Haiyan began to shake again. An apology came, syllable by syllable, from her mouth. Keen walked and smiled, realizing that he needed to act now. He walked towards the conflict. He walked through the crowd and was already approaching. He asked, "What is happening here?" He stood in the middle of a large crowd out and thought that he could not imagine such a commotion. He looked forward calmly and thought that what happened between them did not concern him. What's important now? He looked at the girl's frightened face and thought about the fact that she was dying. Ji turned to him and said that he was on time because he was now. Keen asked if she was in her right mind. Ji staggered in surprise, asking what the hero was talking about. He asked if she really thought they had a neighborhood playground here. He looked around at the crowd around him and asked what if monsters would come running here because of their screams. The crowd gradually began to panic. Ji put out her hand and said what the situation was now. Keen interrupted her and said that he watched everything from afar and understood. He closed his eyes and said that Joe had recently said that it is unknown who is the pest and who is the victim. Ji started screaming incomprehensibly that it was Hyang's fault. After Keen said that when a group corners one person, anyone would get scared, isn't that so? Ji fell silent because Keen asked if she could really be so sure that Suku was innocent. She looked away with displeasure. Keen smiled and knew that she could not be sure of this, otherwise the responsibility would fall entirely on her. He began to speak ostentatiously. Let the scene of them poisoning a completely innocent man, he said, would have happened if Henson had seen it. He said that he would not be happy about it at all. Everyone began to look away. People were worried. Keen approached the crying Heian and said what he thought. He looked at her with a smile and said that she was not that kind of person at all. Heian looked at him with tears in her eyes. Ji started screaming that Kim couldn't know this because they had only known each other for a couple of days. He looked at the girl and asked if you say to a new school friend, "Let's get closer, does that mean let's sleep with each other?" Ji frowned. Keen asked her to think carefully and asked, "How does bodily connection relate to intimacy?" Ji turned around because someone in the crowd said that Keen was right, and this all smacked of coercion. People around began to support and agree with the hero's opinion. Ji watched in shock. She turned to the hero and asked if he was serious because this was too much. She didn't say anything and looked at the hero with horror. He smiled insidiously and mentally asked Gio to look more carefully. She looked up at him. He mentally told her that he was now the king of this camp. He took the crown from her head and he put it on for himself. She froze in place in front of the crowd. Keen folded his arms over his chest and asked why everyone was crowded here. He looked at several people and said that it would be better to cure Aoka first and ordered 2 people to move him. The girl and the fat man did not expect that they would be given the order. Ji looked gloomily at her feet while Keen ordered everyone to clean up here before the regressor returns and make sure that they can immediately fit into the schedule. He said that monsters could come running because of what happened, and so he ordered the big man to inspect the area. Puck saluted with a smile. Keen looked at Heian with a smile and said that they needed to talk a little. Heian blushed and agreed. Keen walked away with an insidious smile while the crowd tried to understand where the truth was. Keen mentally told Heian not to pay attention to such trifles, because the most important thing is that she received the position of favorite and holder of power. Ji chewed her nails nervously. Keen sat down at an empty table made of boxes and boards. Hei sat down opposite. The girl was shaking, apologizing, and saying that she really didn't have any intentions. And Keen said that he knew and told the girl that she was not to blame for anything. He smiled sweetly again and said that she could tell him everything and how convenient it was for her. Heian looked at the hero in surprise. She wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. She began to speak, pronouncing the words heavily. She said that, then suddenly, Mr. Sokutin said the name knowingly, "Hey," and like a small child began to wave her hand and say that he grabbed her like that, and shouted. Keen looked at the girl sympathetically. She looked at the floor and in one breath said that it happened like this. Suddenly Park came, hit that man, and missed Ju. Keen sat and was surprised internally, not understanding what she was saying. A man and a girl were sitting opposite. Keen mentally ignored everything she said, showing only sympathy. He said, "How hard it must be for her." But the girl denied it. She exhaled and said that she felt much better and thanked him. Keen looked at the girl and said, "No way." Then he said that it was due to the circumstances, but Heian immediately interrupted him and said that that's not what she meant. She smiled and clarified that she thanked him for believing her. Keen smiled sweetly, and the girl said that he has been constantly helping her since their first meeting, but she did nothing for him, and asked why he was so kind to her. She sat embarrassedly and listened to him say that he did what he thought was right, and said that if you still look for the reason, he remembered the scene from home where his sister asks him to borrow money. Keen said he has a younger sister at home who is the same age as her. He remembered how she rummaged through his wallet and said that looking at Heian, he couldn't help but remember her. He told outright lies and mentally understood that they were not alike at all. He looked gloomily at Han and said to himself that he had forced his younger sister out of himself for the sake of plausibility. A fire was burning not far from the couple. Hei apologized and Keen asked, "What about her?" She replied that she has 2 older sisters, but they have not communicated for a long time. She stretched her fingers and Keen asked about her parents, and she replied that they did not exist. She looked up sharply at the hero, and he said that in this they were alike. P straightened her hair with a nervous smile, saying that it looked a little similar. Keen looked at her with a smile and said that it was so, thinking to himself that it's good when there is something in common. Indeed, in this case, you can easily achieve mutual understanding and interest. He said with a wicked smile that he hoped that this would not burden her. Hyeon shuddered when the hero said that he would like her to communicate with him more freely, while noting that this was solely his desire. The girl shook her hands and asked how. Keen said that first you need to start with informal speech. Hyeon embarrassedly pressed her finger against her finger and said that she understood everything. Keen smiled wickedly. He used the eyes of the soul. He saw that the girl had no specialization, yet he saw the overall score, which said she still had monstrous potential. He looked at the embarrassed girl and thought that he needed to develop her into a magician as quickly as possible, and asked himself whether it was worth touching on the topic of magic after getting closer. He looked at his hand. Someone distracted the couple by asking for a moment. Hen turned towards the voice, and it seemed familiar to Keen. He smiled and thought that he assumed that she would come to him after some time, but everything happened faster than he expected. He turned to Hyeon. She bowed guiltily when he asked to leave them for a while. Hyeon looked at her evening guest in surprise. She walked past Ji. Kim looked at the girl and asked, "What was the matter?" Ji looked guiltily at the hero and said that she wanted to apologize for causing a fuss. They sat opposite each other, and Keen said that everything was fine and asked for forgiveness in return for reacting a little harshly. But Ji began to take the blow on herself. Keen closed his eyes. She turned to him, and he thought that he still couldn't get used to her. Jill looked down and asked if he could leave the matter to her. She said that she had thought it through well and that she was equally to blame for both Hyeon and Suku. She said that if Keen entrusted it to her, but he interrupted her and said that she could do whatever she wanted. Ji looked in surprise at the hero, who said that initially the management of the camp play with her. He apologized for brazenly butting in. Keen closed his eyes again when the girl said she didn't mean it. He said he understood what she meant. He smiled wickedly and said that he preferred not to have to interfere anymore, like he did today. He said that he and she are people who have nothing in their souls and no talents either. He said that she knows this very well. He said that in order to survive, people like them should only engage in politics. Ji silently listened to the speech of the hero, who said that their desire to keep everything in their hands is the same. He asked her not to cross the line. Ji stood up abruptly. She shyly sat down next to the hero. She hugged his hand and said that she understood perfectly and said that she would not cross the line in the future. She asked for forgiveness for causing trouble. The hero said that it was nothing like that and asked why this was happening all of a sudden. Ji giggled and asked, smiling, is it really so clear from her what she's thinking? She asked the hero to listen. He looked at her with concern. She smiled playfully and said that she loved ambitious people. She moved closer to him and said that the longer she looks at the hero, the more she realizes that he is her type. She asked, "Why don't they become a little closer to each other?" Keen asked. "What benefit does this have for him?" Ji asked if he was trying to rein her in to make himself look like a hero in her eyes. She said that Hyeon is weak and added that she will have many enemies even without Soku, but she can look after her. Keen smiled sweetly and looked at the girl. She touched the hero's face, and he said that they were very similar to her. She agreed. They kissed. The hero called her his soulmate. A few days later, people built a platform out of planks. Soku shouted that he had caused trouble to people and sincerely apologizes for this. The men were discussing the latest news and discussing the fact that Ji took the side of the hero, which is why Suk is now apologizing. Ji walked through the crowd and people kept saying that she had no choice in the position. The hero was now higher. People discussed how dear Han is to the hero. Keen calmly watched the gossip. The couple sat by the fire. Ji warmed herself with the hero's jacket. He said that she should deal with Soku on her own, and should keep a good eye on Han. Ji smiled. The hero said that if something happens, she should report immediately. The girl said that she understood everything, and asked if he wanted to end everything so that people would no longer make noise. Keen looked at the smiling girl, who said that in this situation an environment would naturally be created in which Hyeon would have no choice but to rely on the hero. Ji straightened her hair with a smile and said that there really is something in this girl. If Oppa is so obsessed with her? Keen looked at her calmly. He turned away and said that Nuna didn't need to know about it. Ji looked at the hero in confusion and asked why he suddenly called her Nuna. Keen looked forward and thought that Ji was a great politician for changing the atmosphere so quickly, and he thought it was good that they started cooperating. Thanks to this, he listens to Hai's mental torment for several days in a row. He looked ahead with a stony face while Haiyan cried next to him. She wiped away the tears from her eyes and said that it was a great relief that there was a hero, and now he taught her magic every day. Keen smiled and said that it was a relief to him that she was there. He happily noted that coeducation is ideal for bonding. They were sitting near a barrel of supplies. Keen asked if she could use basic magic. Already Haiyan said she wasn't sure yet. The hero put his finger forward and it began to glow. He asked the spark to answer the call. Haiyan looked in surprise at how fire flowed from the hero's finger. She blushed and squealed in delight. The hero thought that he had not only been dealing with Han's case lately, he remembered training with the big guy. They trained together to get used to their specialization. The fire was still flowing from the finger, and the hero said that imagination is important if you want to summon fire. He said that you need to cast the spell, imagining a real flame. The fire dried up, and smoke came out of the finger. Keen exhaled, dissatisfied, and thought that the problem was that all the spells he knew were second-rate. He told Haiyan that they had not moved from the point for several days, and said that perhaps she could not cast magic due to lack of specialization. He looked at the girl with a smile and said that after some time they would all go hunting with the regressor, and suggested that they practice together until that moment. Hei smiled happily and said that she would try her best. Keen stood up and suggested, "We finish for today." Heian looked anxiously at the departing hero and said that she didn't understand something. Keen smiled in surprise when Heian said that her mana was growing, and he thought to himself how well his treasure was growing. He looked at the embarrassed girl with an insidious smile and thought that after some time she would receive a specialization, and decided to see how much her mana had risen. He summoned the eyes of the soul. Heian's status appeared. Keen looked at the indicators in confusion. The girl's specialty was already a magician. Mastering magic was at a heroic level. Cold sweat ran down the hero's face. He looked at her blankly and did not understand when she had already become a magician. He did not take his surprised gaze off the girl. Haiyan smiled sweetly and said that she still does not understand how to properly manage Mama. He looked at her in horror and thought that this was a blatant lie and asked, "Since when?" The hero looked at the smiling girl and mentally asked her if she was really lying to him. He rubbed his neck in embarrassment. Han pulled him out of his thoughts. He apologized and said that he was thinking about something. He leaned towards the girl and started talking about how to control mana. Hei scratched her cheek guiltily and said that it was a little difficult for her. Even after his explanations, the hero looked through the status window at mastering Hai's magic and saw that everything was very easy for her. He thought, in surprise, that with such monstrous abilities, simply mastering mana couldn't be difficult. Heian smiled. Keen said that for the first time they could present a picture together, and she happily agreed. Mentally, the hero asked the girl what she was thinking about. He stretched her hand forward and said that first you need to imagine how a flame ignites in your hand, and asked if she could repeat what he did. Recently, a small flame appeared from the girl's finger, and Keen looked at it with disappointment. Heian opened her eyes wide. The fire disappeared, and she feigned innocent surprise. The hero looked at her as if she were mocking him. He frowned as Hei tearfully said that she couldn't do anything even though Oppa taught her so hard. The hero realized that the girl had just deliberately failed. The couple was surrounded by green trees. The girl asked to repeat it again, but Oppa said that was all for today because he still had things to do. A girl approached the couple and got into their conversation, calling the hero the girl named H, and smiled and asked if the hero could give her a minute. He remembered that this was G's confidant and her contact. He noted that since that day, G always sends her to him. He looked seriously at the guest, while Heian sat embarrassingly behind him and said that he would spare time. At the same time, he thought that recently they had often crossed paths because of the incident with Saku, and mentally asked, what else do they need from him today? He turned to Heian with a smile and said goodbye to her. Until tomorrow, she said goodbye with a smile and a blush on her cheeks. Heian watched the red-haired girl with concern. Keen, without getting up, asked if something had happened. Heian scratched her head and said that it was nothing special and asked that the lineup for the next hunt should be announced today, which the hero confirmed. He looked calmly and wondered when she asked if she could join, if it wasn't too late. He summoned the eyes of the soul and looked at the girl's characteristics. I looked and thought there was nothing wrong. He looked at her and said that he was not sure because he nominated Hyeon in the first place. Hyeon leaned towards him and said that they needed people who could fight. Anyway, Hyeon smiled and asked if she wouldn't be better than Hang, who acts like a child. Keen thought that this was very rude towards a person who would become an archmage in the future, but decided that it was very good for supporting the potential. He thought about it and said that he would first discuss everything with the regressor, but did not promise anything. Hyeon smiled and said that even a few words give me hope. Ji, Henson, Keen, and Park stood in front of the people. The girl asked them to catch the silence and gather for a while because there was an important announcement regarding the upcoming hunt. Haein was sitting on the ground. Someone was looking at her in disbelief, and Henson said that while people were in the midst of work, he spread his hands at the podium and said that it would be difficult to continue to survive in this place. They are gradually with those people who are able to fight. People looked at the pensive hand and gossiped, will she really go hunting? They called it the hero's tale and called his specific taste. Hen straightened her hair and mentally addressed the hero. She remembered how he showed her how to summon fire and mentally told him that it seemed to her that her heart would then jump out of her chest, and she considered the hero the only one she could rely on. She looked dreamily into the void and wanted to meet the hero as quickly as possible. She thought that she was ashamed to deceive him, but at least in this way she was able to keep his interest. Haein stood at the girl's feet and said that she scared her. Haein looked at the girl, who asked if she was really waiting for the hero. Here she called her a stalker and said that's why she had had such a strange look, because it was because she had recently spoken to the hero. Haein stood up and said that it was nothing like that because she and Keon were just... Haein interrupted her and said that she looked stupid. Anyway, she smiled evilly and asked if she really liked the hero. Haein grabbed Haein by the shoulders and she looked in horror at the looming shadow. Haein came close to her and asked if the girl really thinks that the hero really values her. She retreated from the frightened Haein with a smile and said that she was simply lucky to be in the same party with the hero on the first day, and said that Haein was deeply mistaken if she thought that the hero liked her. He smiled sarcastically and said that he couldn't say anything about such naive children, but Haeon's type of hero was clearly familiar. She imagined the hero as a bloody chess genius and said that people like him don't trust anyone, quickly lose interest, and ruthlessly abandon them when people no longer need them. Haein looked into emptiness and fear, while Haein said that, in her opinion, such a capricious and weak girl. The girl thought with horror that the hero would really leave her, and Haein laughed and ended up saying that Haein would get tired of him very quickly. The girl's terrible thoughts rejected what was said, and she thought that the hero was definitely not like that because he was different from other people. Hae shook and said that Oppa is not like that. Hen pointed her finger at her and noted that she heard this expression again. She said that she understood why the hero chose her. She pointed her finger at the girl's face and said that she was a great card for getting the most out of her and throwing her away. She asked if Hyeon would really stick tightly, should you show at least a little kindness to her? She said that the girl was abandoned one after another by everyone who treated her well. Hyeon remembered her evil older sisters and asked her to stop. Haeon ordered her to try to father as much as she needed before Keon left her. Haeon smiled wickedly and said that otherwise, she and other people would deprive her of everything. She leaned towards the heroine with an evil smile, who asked her to stop, but Haeon continued to say that more importantly, she was much closer to the hero. Haeon turned around sharply because Henson said that for the upcoming hunt they would take Haeon and Haeon, indicatively H, and said that is expected. He added her to the main squad as she requested. She pushed Han and told her to move and not interfere with her. In parting, she said that they would see each other during the hunt. Haeon slumped his highway and walked away amid cheers. Tears flowed from her eyes. She imagined the cute hero and thought that he couldn't do that. She remembered how sweetly they sat together and remembered that they agreed to go hunting together and exercise together every day in her memories. The hero stroked her head and he told her that she was like family to him and there was nothing wrong with mistakes, and said that they would continue to try together. He looked at her with a smile and said that Hyeon was not that kind of person at all. She mentally said that she looked like a fool and she was not the smartest. But even she understood that Keen sincerely valued her. Hyeon was going up to the podium until Haeon decided that she was blatantly slandering. Park shook her hand with a smile, and Haeon asked the hero not to listen to her. She stood up at the podium with fear and asked the hero not to leave her, even if he did. Heian and Kian smiled and discussed how stupid Heian is and how annoying she is. Heian froze and looked at this action in disbelief. Keen and Heen looked at the girl insidiously, and Keen said that he only treated her kindly, but she made up her own mind and stuck like a bath leaf. They talked about how annoying she was. Heian remembered all the caustic and nasty words that were said to her. She grabbed her head in horror and asked to stop. She said that it was too noisy and her head hurt. She asked to stop. Kiang and Hyeon stood close to each other, Hao and told not to listen to her, and the hero said that he hates her. Everything that was happening was collapsing before the girl's eyes and swam in her eyes in negative tones. She opened her eyes wide and remembered the phrase that Hen suits the hero more than she does. Everything collapsed. She asked not to be taken away from her. A few minutes ago, Henson spoke to people from the podium and asked for forgiveness for gathering people in such the midst of work. He said that how well all people know. He looked at the people and said that in terms of food and drinking water, their availability was severely lacking, so they decided that they should gradually conduct adaptive training outside with those people who intended to fight. Hence, he addressed the hero. He summoned flames from his hand. People looked at him in shock. Keen looked at the people and said that as they all know, they are not on Earth now. He said that this place is more like the world of the game, and his specialty here is a magician. He remembered how he screamed in fear and moments of trouble and said that he was a newbie and he was an ordinary person who was no different from them. He said that at first it was normal for him to run and hide from monsters in fear. He looked at the flame and said, "However, if you are not afraid in fight, you can gain the strength with which victory is possible." People looked at him, and he said that they all need to be more active because only through common efforts can they survive and escape. The crowd charged up and began chanting joyfully. H looked at the people and said that this was a good reaction. Keen said so much that everyone's point of view will change and clarified that soon there will be people who will be against, or, on the contrary, will overwork. Puck smiled and said that it was still better than dying of hunger. Henson looked at the gloomy Hang and said that they would take Hyang and H in with them as a demonstration. Heian was already walking up the stands with a smile. She extended her hand to the hero with a smile and asked him to take care of her. They shook hands. Keen suddenly leaned towards Howen and addressed her by name. He smiled idly, and said that she recently pushed Hyan. Heian turned around in fear. Keen told her with a smile that he was warning her and asked her to get along with each other and stick to boundaries. He said that if she touched Heian again, then life would become difficult for her. He asked if she understood. Heian looked down guiltily and said in a trembling voice that she understood. Keen smiled falsely and asked to take care of him too. He noted to himself that she needed to be controlled, at least this way. He looked at Heian leaving in fear and thought that now was the ideal time to get closer to Heian because if you continue to provoke this fickle girl. He suddenly remembered and wondered why Heian didn't get up. He looked down and was surprised. Hyan stood gloomily in the crowd. She watched what was happening with horror on her face. Teen suddenly also looked at her with great concern. He looked at the girl's face and tried to understand what was happening now and asked himself if he was imagining it. He grabbed his head. Puck asked if anything hurt him, and the hero replied that he was just a little unwell. Pak looked seriously at the hero and advised him to have a good rest today and said that Keen only cares about the people from the camp every day, that he forgot to think a little about himself. Keem looked at Hyan and Park kept asking if he hadn't been eating well lately. He said it wasn't that he was worried about him, but he offered to share his bread. Heian raised her hand with a sweet smile. Keen raised his hand in response to her with a nervous, scared smile. He noted to himself that something had gone wrong. Hyan looked at the frightened hero. She remembered how he threatened her. She bit her finger and thought that everything had gone badly. She was annoyed. She began to remember how she had pleased Dia and noted how much effort she had put into getting to this position. Jo caught the attention of the pensive Heian. She asked with a smile if she would do well tomorrow. She said to be especially careful about the comfort of people like the hero. Heian frowned and wondered if they were now asking her to wag her tail in front of the hero, which is what she asked. Ji covered her face with her hand and said with a gloomy hand that if she needed it, then yes, and asked if she didn't like it. Hen's head drooped as Gio asked what was wrong with having common ground with capable people. She considers herself not one of those who like to take risks, so she might as well have as many guarantees as possible. Hyan agreed and realized how badly she was caught. She looked at the coughing hero. Keen looked down thoughtfully, and Heen thought that he had come from nowhere and instantly overthrown Ji and gained real power. Heian thought that the hero was not a simple goat. She imagined how she was lying behind everyone, and if this continued, she would really be inferior in every sense to the useless and stupid H. She thought that all her efforts would go down the drain. She stood clenching her fist and thought that she could not sit idle at any cost. She narrowed her eyes angrily and thought that she must attract the attention of the hero, because this is the only way she can survive the next day. People stood on the site, and Henson said that he and the big guy would lead the squad, and Keen and Heian will support from behind. Henson calmly said that since this was the girls' first outing, he asked for an especially strong focus on safety, and he asked everyone to help them adapt to the hunt. Keen looked at Hay with a twig in his hands. Henson began to talk about tactics. Heian silently looked ahead, and the speech of the regressor merged into a single den. The hero wondered if he really saw the expression on his face full of madness. Yesterday, cold sweat ran down the hero's face. He thought that he had been too fixated on Heian lately, so he came up with ideas for himself. Heian turned sharply to the hero. She smiled lovingly and looked at him. Heian smiled back at her, causing Heian behind her to get annoyed. She looked at the hero enviously. Henson turned around, everyone looked forward, and Henson ordered to move forward. The hero did not yet know how full of shocks this campaign would become. Monsters of different sizes are shown. Henson stabs one of them and blood gushes out. Keen holds off the monster's attack with his weapon. The girls look at them worriedly. Suddenly, the young man decisively kills the monster. Heian is delighted, and Heian looks at her, dumbfounded. The bloody corpse of the creature is visible. Puck breathes heavily, wondering why there's so much change today, to which Henson tells him to be careful. Suddenly he looks away when something appears to be to his left. A huge monster is shown with its arms raised. Tuck blocks his blow with his shield. Suddenly, he is enveloped in lightning. He rushes forward and strikes the monster. The creature opens its mouth angrily. Puck trembles, indicating that it is difficult for him to hold. Turning to Hui, the young man tells her to cut down the monster now, and she just trembles with fear, asking how to do it, to which she receives the answer that she can simply cut with the spear she is holding. Tears appear in the girl's eyes when the question is asked about why she is standing because she was told to chop. She thinks that this is more disgusting than she imagined, but she understands that she must pull herself together. She must cope. She must look good this time. The monster turns on her as she points her spear at him. She looks at him in fear. Keen just clicks, clenching her jaw, and remembers that it was only recently that she pretended to be so cool. He turns away, calling out to her as she continues to tremble. He suddenly takes her hand. He comes close to her ear, telling her that if she acts so slowly next time, everyone will die. Tears are visible on her frightened face. The young man, holding both her hands calmly, tells her to put strength into her hands. Suddenly a spear flies. It pierces the monster, thanks to Keen's movement. Blood gushes, and the young man only claims that he is not dead yet, and the girl cannot relax. His gaze is almost emotionless as he tells her to treat the creature like a piece of meat. The monster growls with its mouth open. Suddenly he falls to the ground. Haeyong sinks to her knees dejectedly. She can't stop crying. She breathes heavily while everyone watches her. Keen indifferently states that this was the first and last time he helped her. He looks away, telling her that in this world no one can rely solely on outside help, but fortunately for Heian, today's adaptation day. He raises his eyebrows, noting that next time she will survive on her own. The girl lowers her gaze, remembering how she laughed at Han, and thinks that she is very familiar with the type of young man. Such people do not trust anyone, quickly lose interest, and mercilessly abandon him when they no longer need him. She clenches her hands into fists, wondering what she expected from such a person, because to put it bluntly, it might be her turn next time. Keen walks up to her, smiling, and praises her. The girl turns around, looking back with irritation. She sits on her lap as Keen leans towards her, as Hay, and watches. The girl is only silent, looking at them somewhat strangely. A blazing fire is shown. Keen and Heian are sitting next to him, and the question is asked whether it's Pak his turn next. Then the young man, having received an answer, tells her to go to bed slowly because she has worked hard. Approaching the hole in the wall, Keen informs Puck about the changing of the guard. He stands up, noticing that the young man has good stamina. He leaves, holding his head, and Keen silently lies down. He is somewhat confused when he realizes that he cannot sleep and believes that he was simply nervous. It is reported that unnecessary thoughts are starting to swirl in his head. It talks about what will happen after this hunt. A young man is shown lying down, covering himself with a jacket. People are seen walking somewhere, and the question is asked about which direction they need to move in order to survive. The young man asks what kind of continent this is. A certain building with a large flag is shown when it turns out that this is the continent that strange instructor mentioned at the very beginning. Keen wonders why he came here in the first place. The planet Earth is depicted, and he notices that he still does not particularly regret the loss of his home. Henson is seen leaning on a weapon, and the idea is heard that he has regressed, so he knows everything. The guy looks away and they talk about him. A creature with wings appears in the sky, and the question is asked about what happened in the past. The young man closes his eyes, thinking that Henson has returned. His eyes finally close. He lies on his back, covered with a jacket. Suddenly he opens his eyes and puts his hand on his head, wondering what time it is. He looks away. Hyan stands next to him, head down. He rubs his eyes questioningly. The girl's gaze turns out to be terrifying. Her eyes are wide open. The young man looks at her worriedly. He immediately turns away, closing his eyes, and decides that he is imagining this while asleep. The girl turns her head in his direction while he thinks that this is a delusion because she is kind. She approaches him from behind. Hei looks at the young man intently. She reaches out her hand to him, touching his hair. She thinks that his sleeping face is cute, and he is adorable. She smiles, petting him. She blushes, looking at him in love. Only one word is repeated and repeat. She smiles strangely, tucking her hair behind her ear. She insists that she won't let anyone take it away from her.